got to tell you, I love that little. Before we start the show, there's like groovy little music playing, and it gets me going. Good evening, everybody. I'm Russ Kane, and welcome to Men's Radio. And this is one of my absolute favorite hours of the week, with the extraordinary force of nature that is Ollie Mammon. And the show is called the ABC of CBD. I have to say, it's been a lightning ride. It's like trying to hold on to the back of a dragon. I have learned so much in the last. This is show seven. Yeah, good guess on my part. So this is show 7. I really have learned so much. Ollie is the most extraordinary fellow. But before we go to Ollie, let's have a quick word from our sponsors.
I'm sure you've heard before that good quality CBD needs to be really, really expensive. This is the new view of CBD, a product created by users for users, a product at an affordable price, available everywhere, at any time, at the simple click of a button. Just CBD and MCT oil. No additives, no preservatives, and no flavor enhancers. It's a simple subscription-based service, the cleanest possible CBD delivered to your door for the lowest possible price. Your product, your rights for the lowest possible price.
That's really interesting. I've been singing your praises because a lot of people say, "Well, have you tried?" I said, "Well, of course I've tried it. I'm going to be on the show every week with Ollie." And
I made you try it before you got, before you got into bed with me. I made you open your mouth,
metaphorically. Good night, everybody.
So wrong.
Thanks for watching. That's wrong on just like so many levels. Right, Ollie.
So
it's going to be an interesting show tonight.
I'm on one Ollie, of those levels.
I know you can tell he's got the devil inside. Right, Ollie, over to you because I know we've got a jam-packed show, and I'm really, really excited and looking forward to this.
So, welcome to the very special Medical Cannabis Awareness Week episode of the ABC of CBD. Yep, you've heard it right. It's Medical Cannabis Awareness Week this week. Now, because it's Medical Cannabis Awareness Week, we thought we would move a little bit away from the education and really bring you something from that medical cannabis world. So our guest today is a girl called Tanine Montgomery. She's an incredible, incredible woman. She's lived a story which I wouldn't wish upon anyone, but she's come here to share it today. Her daughter, Indy, suffers from epilepsy, and she really does have one of those real medical cannabis miracle stories. So the point of today is to really like look into epilepsy and cannabis, how the two are affiliated, to get an insight into the life of someone who's basically gone on this journey to find this cure for their daughter. They've gone round and round and round the roundabout 1,000,000 times before finding what they needed to find. And I mean, I think for all of our listeners and viewers out there, especially after last week when we discussed the medical system with Dr. Barron, it'll be quite nice to know as a user, I know it's quite specific being epilepsy, but as a user, what's available to you out there in the general journey of someone who tried to find, the answer to their pain. Now, everyone knows I'm a sufferer. I suffer from Tourette's syndrome, but I was never going to die. All right. And this is the main thing. And it's to put things into perspective. Today, we're speaking to someone who has probably saved their daughter's life. And it's that story which, I don't have that story. I've got a story of I removed a horrible discomfort from my life with my Tourette's syndrome. And I deal with the horrible discomfort of my ailments with cannabinoids. She has a miracle story, and it's not something which many people have done. There's still a massive demonization around cannabis. There are more and more and more mothers using it on their children, but it's not really the be all and end all, and it's not the everyday situation which anyone goes in. So our guest today is Tanine. She, like I said, she's absolutely incredible. Her daughter actually is also a medicinal cannabis license holder, so she actually gets prescription cannabis for her ailments now. And I feel like that's also another part of the story we can go into, is how she actually ended up getting her meds for her daughter. But without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Tanine Montgomery because, I'll be honest with you, whatever I say about her, the words which come out of her mouth are so much more gripping and real. And there's not an introduction which I can give this girl. So I just want to basically let her do the talking. So welcome to the show, Tanine.
Hi, Ollie.
Look at the timing. Oh, it actually worked like clockwork. That's awesome.
It does. We have a top producer on the case. The man
Hey,
who's
Ollie.
active.
Hey, Russ.
Hi, Tanine, and very nice to meet you. And I just want to say congratulations on one thing. This is the first picture that we've seen where people don't have bookshelves in the background.
Yeah.
Thank goodness. Yay! Well done.
I've made a
Also,
little effort.
also, I just want to say something. You're our first female guest.
I
which
was
is-
going to ask because I have watched all your shows and I was thinking I am the first female guest, which is quite nice.
Yeah, you're the first female guest, which means, it's got to mean something. I'm not saying that other females aren't as good as you, but it's got to mean something. Also, like I said, it clashes perfectly. Like, first time I met Tanine, she basically heckled me from a crowd, and we ended up having this beautiful 45-minute conversation in front of an audience. That's literally the first time I met her. Must have been, it feel like exactly 1 year ago. It was the White Label Expo last November.
Yeah.
So exactly 1 year ago. And, I've just, I love your story, and I love the story of Indie Rose, right? Of Indie Rose. And I call her Indie.
Before we get into it, because I'm incurably nosy, Tanine, what were you heckling him about?
Learning.
Learning.
I wanted to learn. And Ollie knew I wanted to learn.
And how did you get a word in edgeways?
I can probably talk as much as Ollie.
This is fantastic.
Our little chats on the phone to discuss things take about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
I've known Ollie now for several months, because it took months in the planning before we got the show. And someone said, "Are you going to have a little chat with Ollie?" And I go, "Can I just correct you there? There is no such thing as a little chat with Ollie. I have to set aside in my diary an hour.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if I'm just saying, 'Hi, Ollie, how are you?' That's all I say. And then an hour later I say, 'Lovely talking to you.' And I put the phone down.
The worst thing is when I'm like, yeah, I've only got a minute, and then 45 minutes later I'm still on the phone. I'm like, look, dude, mate, I've got to go. It's like, you're the one who's been talking, okay? So that's like my life. Yeah, but Tanine can talk as much as me. She's as bad as me, but look, we might as well start.
As good as you think?
To be honest with you, she's lived a different story. I would say in her journey, she's 50 times better than me. And to be honest with you, when it comes to cannabis and epilepsy, the knowledge inside, Tanine's brain dwarfs what I have. There are very often I'll reach out to her and ask her questions when it comes to, that sort of situation, because she's lived it. I understand.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say though, Ollie, that, that's forcible. I had a specific thing to treat. I had a love attachment, which meant that was my goal. It's a different kind of thing. So you were going to absorb more knowledge when it's so close to home like that,
Of course.
Let's go back to the very beginning, Tanine, and tell us your story, because it does sound fascinating and also very educational and illuminating.
Okay, so I think we should start way back when Indy was born, 2014, and Indy was completely normal and a beautiful little girl. I'm just going to warn you all now that I probably will get emotional telling my story.
That's fine. Tanine, we're here for you, my darling. We're here for you.
Tanine, don't worry. We're very used to that on men's radio and women's radio, I assure you. So you just carry on. Don't worry about it.
So yeah, April 2014, Indy was born. She was beautiful. Everything that I ever dreamed I had there in front of me, and I couldn't have wished for more. And when Indy was 4 months old, she was just really unhappy one day, and I just noticed how unhappy she was. And being a new parent, I thought, oh, maybe she's had a growth spurt. She needs more food. Maybe she doesn't want breast milk anymore. Maybe, you're starting to sort of worry because you're a new parent. And I remember the day I turned around to make her a bottle thinking she was hungry. And my mum was there, and my mum just said, I don't think there's something right. She stopped crying instantly, and she slumped all on her left side. Ooh. And she started having these convulsions. And I've never seen anybody have an epileptic seizure. I don't have epilepsy in my family. So I had no idea what was going on. In actual fact, where she was slumped to her left, I actually thought she was having a stroke, because I had heard of babies previously having strokes. And I panicked. And
of course you would.
I rang the doctors. which was just crazy because I should have rang an ambulance, but I rang the doctor, and the doctor's was like 1 minute drive away. I put Indy on my mum's lap and we drove to the doctor's, and she was still having these convulsions. And I must say the doctors were fantastic, and they took her off and they helped her and they called the ambulance service and etc. This was the first seizure she had.
How old
and
was
we
she?
were reassured she was 4 months old. So we were reassured that it was a febrile convulsion and that it was probably due to a spike in temperature because of the vaccines that she'd had just previously. So, I didn't feel particularly worried. I know my sister had a febrile convulsion when she was young. I was scared of what I'd seen. I was shocked, but I was hopeful that I wouldn't have to see it again. And from that point, Indy just didn't stop seizing. She had 9 different types of seizure. So there are varying different types of seizure. You have your tonic-clonic seizures, and then you have your sort of more smaller seizures like your focal seizures or your myoclonic jerks. All of these seizures are dangerous because you're not conscious, most of the time in these seizures. And so she started attributing different seizures on a daily basis. And we were really concerned, and we were ringing ambulances on a regular basis. And it was a hugely frightening place.
How often were these seizures happening?
Like daily. We got seen at the local hospital fairly quickly, and they suspected some form of epilepsy. They did MRI scans and they couldn't find anything, so they sent off for gene testing. So she had gene testing done, which came back that she had a gene mutation, which is called the SCN1A gene mutation. Now, there are some people that live with this gene mutation who attribute no seizures and attribute no problems in life. And there are other people that go on to get what is called Dravet syndrome, which is part, like an extension on the gene mutation effectively, where you have cognitive behavioral problems. So you have cognitive decline, you have other issues like walking abnormalities. We were always told that Indy didn't have Dravet syndrome at this very young stage because she was still developing. So she was starting to do the normal things. She was around 6 months old when she was diagnosed, and she started to do the normal things a 6-month-old would do. And she progressed fairly normally, even despite her seizures, which was still really uncontrolled, for about a year. And she spoke fairly well, and she was maybe more clumsy than other children of her age, but she was developing, and we had no sort of worry of this Dravet syndrome, which was the part of the condition that really takes your child away from you. So that's kind of where we were at, and when Indy got to 2.5, she stopped talking. Over 10 days, she just lost the complete ability to talk, and we saw this huge deterioration. She was still having seizures. They were still uncontrolled. The main thing I just want to say is that Indy was happy, and I don't know how, but sometimes the cards you're dealt are the only cards you know, and she was always a happy child. And that was nice to see, and it was refreshing. But the problem is in order to medicate her seizures, we had to use these pharmaceutical drugs that they had on offer, which sedated her heavily, which made her miserable, which made her not want to eat. They gave her a lot of side effects and didn't really control her seizures. They may control them for short periods of time. And when I say short periods of time, you were talking maybe a week.
I just think it's a good time. I think it's a good time. Shall we show the video which Tanina's provided in order to show people what one of the seizures which Tanina was dealing with on a daily basis, what one of these things actually looks like? Shall we do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
No, she's having a seizure still, so she's...
Okay. Is she breathing?
Yeah.
Okay. Has she had more than one fit in a row?
Yes.
Was she alert between fits?
Yes.
Is she diabetic?
No.
Okay. Does she have a history of stroke or brain tumour?
No.
Has the twitching stopped yet?
No.
Okay. Now, I've organised that help for you now. Stay on the line. I'll tell you exactly what to do next. Now, if there is a defibrillator available, send someone to get it now in case we need it later. If she is still fitting, go through resuscitation. Don't hold her down or put anything into her mouth, and move dangerous objects away from her. When she stops fitting, lay her down and make sure she is breathing. Turn her gently on her side when that fitting stops. When she wakes up, reassure her and tell her not to get up and walk around.
Hello, princess.
Okay?
Yeah.
So be reassured that the help is being arranged for her. Don't let
Thanks.
your daughter have anything to eat or drink. It might make her sick or cause problems for the doctor. And just let her rest in the most comfortable position and wait for that help to arrive. Now, I'll stay on the line with you as long as I can. Watch your daughter very closely and look for any changes. If she becomes less awake or starts getting worse, tell me immediately. And tell me when the emergency crew arrive with her. Now, what medication have you given her?
Midazolam,
And how much midazolam has she been given?
5 mils. She's actually just stopped seizuring.
Oh my goodness me.
That is
Wow.
a day in the life of Tanine Montgomery, everybody.
I remember that day. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning. And
She's such a
what a
beautiful little girl, man. She's such a beautiful little
lady.
girl.
What-
Such a beautiful
Wow.
little girl. And it's just like, it's just so horrible. It's so horrible.
you know,
How old was she when she was
used to
having that
look at it.
seizure? Sorry, how old was she when she was having that seizure?
I think she was about 6 months old. She wasn't very old.
So that was right
It
at
was-
the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
Ah, it's so
and
sad.
also absolutely
And-
terrifying for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can hear that I'm quite scared in my voice on the phone.
No, you
There's
sound
the ambulance
incredibly
crew.
calm.
I'll be honest,
I mean-
you're a soldier, Tanine. When I watched that video yesterday, I was like, this girl is the strongest girl I've ever seen in my life. Because literally at that moment, I would be losing my shit. As in, I don't know. I'm listening to you. I'm watching your partner and you with your kid, and I'm just like, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, you guys are just the strongest people ever. And it's not even like you have been dealing with it for years. You know, you're 2 months down the line. I'm thinking you are. I thought she was. I'm thinking she must be about 6 months to a year old. So I'm thinking it's in the start of all this journey. And I was watching this video. I'm like, how are you so strong? Like, how are you so strong?
Can I just say on behalf of everybody on Men's Radio, all the people watching around the world, thank you very much for sharing that, because that's a very big deal. And thank you, because you know, they say a picture tells 1,000 words, and that really has illustrated the difficulty and the horror and the hugely complex issues that you and your other half were facing. Right. So that was a wow.
Was she taking?
That was quite something.
Sorry about that.
So no, what I was just going to say actually is towards the end of that video, you notice that her face kind of screws up and she's quite unhappy.
Yeah.
For about 4 years, I gave my daughter that midazolam that you heard me say to the ambulance crew that I'd given her, which is classed as a rescue medication for epileptic seizures. And some people it works for, and that's great. It's also the drug that they give to people before they kill them on death row. So it's the sedative drug that they give you before they give you the lethal injection.
So that's the, like the
heavy-
injection before the injection. That's that stuff.
It's a heavy sedative drug. Okay, so for around 4 years, we still are prescribed that, but for around 4 years, I gave that to Indy every time her seizure went over 5 minutes. So she had that a lot. She had that midazolam a lot. And what we noticed, a crucial thing I just want to bring in now, because I may forget earlier, is that when we put Indy onto the cannabis, and we no longer had to use the midazolam because her seizures were not over 5 minutes, that stopped. That was what we thought was part of her seizures, was a side effect from the medication. And it wasn't until we could actually take her off it and we could really see the change in her. So
not only did she have the seizure, this poor little girl, this poor Indy, not only did she have the seizure, she then had a battering from a pharmaceutical compound, which is only given to human beings before they're put down by the state, which is fucking insane. I'm so sorry for swearing. It's the first time I've ever sworn on Men's Radio. I'll be honest, with the first time second time I've ever sworn on Men's Radio. I'll be honest with you, that was completely justified. I can't believe it. That's absolutely mental. I'm so sorry for swearing, everyone. And I'm sorry.
We're over 21, Ollie. Don't give it a moment's thought. It's absolutely fine.
Jeez.
The important thing is to listen to Tanine's story, and
of course,
I'm not worried about the language.
I just wanted to put that point out there because I know we spoke briefly, I think on Tuesday, Ollie, but, you know, if we spoke about pharmaceuticals and we spoke about why I use cannabis, which I'm sure we'll get onto later, but, you know, that was one of the main trigger factors into realizing that the medication she was using wasn't very good for her.
How long was she taking? So what was the name of the medicine you said she's on? I want to write this down.
That's midazolam.
Midazolam.
And that's like a rescue medication.
How long was she taking that for in total?
Oh, on and off for 4 years. I mean, you would give it 5 minutes after a seizure, like a prolonged seizure would be part of Indy's care plan, would be that you would need to give that if her seizure lasted longer than 5 minutes. They were longer than 5 minutes most times. But what I started to learn while watching her seize was the petering out of the seizure was noticeable around 4 minutes or 5 minutes sometimes. So it would make more sense to then not give that medication if you could see that the seizure was going anyway, so that she then doesn't have to suffer the pharmaceutical battering, like you said. So yeah, she had a lot of midazolam. There are children that I know still have a lot of midazolam. I don't think it's a great drug. If it stops seizures, then great. But
she's taking 5 mil, right?
Yeah.
What's the milligram dose of that? As in your 1 mil was, I just thought like you're all about milligrams. So I thought if anyone I could ask this question to, it's you.
When it comes to, I haven't used midazolam for 3 years.
Fine. So you've put it out your mind. You put out your mind.
Yeah, like for me and for Indy, it started to become a pointless medication and a more traumatizing medication, because after the upset, she would then become in this irrational state where when she could walk as she got older, she would want to walk around while on midazolam, which you can imagine is not ideal because she would hurt herself a lot and you can't restrain people. So it just had a lot of knock-on effects that were worse than the seizure just ending and letting her sleep it off.
But in terms of the trauma anyway, so, like as human beings, we all carry, like we carry trauma in very strange ways, and trauma can be triggered by every single one of our senses. So you hear a sound, your trauma can be triggered. You smell a smell, your trauma can be triggered. Now, if she's having a 5-minute seizure and then 5 minutes of bombardment after the seizure from the medication to help her seizure, she's going through 10 minutes of hell. Potentially, the smell or the sight of that midazolam could potentially, I can imagine the trauma it causes. I know things which have traumatized me in my life, and if I come into contact with sights or smells or visuals, they bring me back to that dark place. And I can't imagine what that poor little girl has gone through at such a young age. I mean, it's so horrible. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Tanine.
Anyway, Tanine, I'm going to read a couple of comments from our listeners all over the world. Chrissy Holt, who's watching from the middle of Spain.
Hey, Chrissy.
Lovely mum and daughter, she says. And Sharon McGovern, who at one point really had a huge influence on my life, which I'm not for another time. Hi, Russ. Amazing program. This information needs to be out there.
That's exactly why we brought her on the show. That's why she's
great.
here.
It's great to hear them comments. Thank you.
But it's
Medical Cannabis Awareness Week. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Brilliant.
So let's
what other medication? What other pharmaceutical medication was she on?
Indy's had 8 different pharmaceutical medications and combinations of these 8. So sometimes you'll find with severely epileptic children, they'll be on combined medication. So we never let Indy have any more than 2 medications at one period of time, because it's not sensible to me personally. Try one thing, add one thing. If that's not working, take away the first thing. We don't need to keep adding. These medications are not easy to wean off of. When you try to wean off of these medications, you cause seizures. So you are in between a rock and a hard place when trying these pharmaceutical meds. Indy tried 8 different medications, from sodium valproate, which is quite commonly prescribed for epilepsy, to stiripentol, which is not commonly prescribed for epilepsy, not meant to be prescribed to children under 3 years old. But when they get to the point where they've exhausted all the options that they actually have, they have to start looking at these other options where they actually don't have testing for children under 3 on drugs like stiripintal and stuff like that. So your child becomes the test subject. And so this is what kind of confuses me when people say, but if you use medical cannabis, you're trialing a medication on your drug. Well, all being said, that the doctors were prescribing my daughter medication that was effectively a trial on my child, because we have a child with a rare condition being given medication that's never been used on children under 3 years old, never being tested on the side effects for children under 3 years old, and they are different to us as adults. They're still growing, they're still developing. So I think that's worth mentioning, that when people do have, come to me and say, but, why would you give medical cannabis over these pharmaceutical drugs, is because these pharmaceutical drugs failed Indy. They failed to control her seizures. They made her miserable, and they stopped her having a quality of life. And quite crucially, anyone with a condition needs a quality of life. And that was the most important thing for us, was to find something that gave India quality of life.
Just to be clear, of course, though, Tanine, and for the sake of balance, the drugs, although they had not been tested on a child as young as your daughter, of course, had undergone complete trials before they were brought to market and allowed to be prescribed.
Yeah. But the example I'm using is purely because at the moment we're talking about medical cannabis, and we have this issue where doctors within the NHS don't want to prescribe medical cannabis because they're very fearful of the effects on children like Indy. And
the demonization.
My point is that we have studies and tests all around the world on cannabis and what it does, and we can pull that information in and we can use that information. And so it's been a massively difficult journey when you have a doctor prescribing one thing that, technically isn't licensed, isn't suitable potentially for my child, but may work. So we make an agreement that we want to try this medication, and that's fine. The same thing should be happening with cannabis.
1,000,000%.
Was it just because of my own curiosity again, Tanine, when I'm presuming the GP said we're going to try these drugs, but they haven't been tried on a child of this age, did you have to sign some forms? Did you have to give consent? Was it explained to you fully?
So no, you see a pediatric neurologist when you have a child with a condition as severe as Indy's, and kind of most of the frontline drugs, are tested, and many children have used them over the years. I'm not saying children haven't used these drugs. Children have definitely used these drugs, and for some children they really work. But the point is more, we didn't have to sign anything. We weren't told anything about any medication. We researched it ourselves, because like anything you're putting into somebody's body, you should research it, because how are you going to know what a side effect is if you don't know what you're looking for?
But also, let's bear in mind something, Ross. These are not medicines which me and you could go and buy or get prescribed for any reason. These medicines are basically as illegal as cannabis.
Yeah,
if me and you got caught with midazolam in our pockets, all right, and we got caught by police, and we had let's say a sizable amount enough that you couldn't just say you're holding a few pills for a friend, you're going to go to jail for as long as if you have medicinal cannabis.
I don't want to particularly go down this side route, because I'm much more interested in Tanine's story, which is riveting. But I am confused, Ollie. If these are approved drugs, presumably by NICE, NICE, and the rest, they're not illegal drugs. They are illegal drugs.
Fine. So what happens is a product is only deemed illegal if the person owning it doesn't have legal permission to use a product. So if someone has legal permission to use a product, the product is no longer deemed illegal, it's deemed legal. But what happens is it's still classified as illegal. So for example, Novocaine, which is used as a sedative
in a dentist.
It's fully illegal if you're not a dentist and you've just got it.
No, I get them.
Okay, you understand. So it's not an illegal compound, but it is illegal the same way that medical cannabis is prescribed to 2 or 3 people in the UK. It does exist, and you can go and buy a private prescription for cannabis. So it's not illegal, but cannabis is still illegal because it's deemed illegal by the greater analysis.
No, I got it. Your Novocaine example explained it perfectly. Right. So, Tanine, you're on these drugs. looking up what the side effects are very, very wisely. I'm stunned that you weren't informed. Well, Ms. Montgomery, this might happen or that might happen. That seems a hell of an...
I will be fair to say that if there's some of these reactions are actually as bad as can cause death. So obviously if they're like the side effects. So one of the medications Indy took, you can get Stevens-Johnson syndrome for, which it starts as a rash, but it can be very, very, very dangerous. And I think it may have been the clobazam that she was on. And they did say to us, if you notice a rash, ring us immediately.
Right. Okay.
But then I did my own research as to what this rash may be, etc. So if it was severe like that, yes, we were told to watch out for things. But I think it's just responsible to research things yourself.
Absolutely, 100%. As long as you don't I always think, and a lot of our experts come on and say, if you trust Dr. Google, just be careful about it. It doesn't know everything. But you're very wise. And of course, I have to ask on a completely personal level, Tanine, were you and your partner able to have any sort of life at all during this period? Because my feeling is it would be all consuming.
That was one thing that was really, really noticeable, I think, for us as young parents and first-time parents was we didn't have a huge amount of support around us, and we felt too scared to go out.
How old were you when this was all happening, Tanine? Please tell us, because I didn't.
I was 24 when I had Indy.
You were a baby, not to sound like it. Yeah, you were a baby.
I had no experience with babies or children, so it was just like a new time mum like everybody else. And my partner was working, and I just felt scared to go anywhere. I felt scared to go out and scared to sleep, and because Indy has seizures in her sleep. And so it was just, time. It was quite a frightening period.
Another question for you, which hadn't even crossed my mind as we walk through this sort of nightmare with you. And again, thank you for being so honest, and thank you for sharing, because I'm sure you're helping people all over, all our listeners, all people who are watching and listening. When did you? Is it enough to have, I don't know, a baby monitor? Does the baby sleep with you guys? Because you're thinking in the middle of the night, I wouldn't be able to go to sleep. God forbid, you're thinking, oh my God, I'm asleep and the baby's having a seizure. How did you get through that?
So there are monitors that are available, but not provided by the NHS. So you do have to fundraise for them. They're not cheap. You're talking expensive equipment.
How much is expensive, Tanine?
We spent just over £2,000 on a system.
It's important to say these figures, because people don't, it's the same why I wanted to show the video, because you say seizure and people think spasm, but they don't think what we've just seen. In the same way, when you say a lot of money, to some people 200 quid's a lot of money, to some people 1,000's a lot of money. I would say £1,000's a lot of money. You've just spent £2,000. I mean, it's a lot of money. It's not a lot of money for what you're buying, but it's a lot of money in the sense that the NHS should be providing that help to mothers. There aren't that many of you mothers who need it. I mean, it's not, it should be provided.
We had to go down the route of GoFundMe's, because my partner was working but just a regular job, and I was at home with Indy with no chance of going back to work. I did some evening work, but there was no real chance of me going back to work. We didn't really know how Indy was going to be and how she was going to develop. So it was really difficult decision as well to make. My partner didn't want to do fundraising. I think it put him in a place where he felt like he couldn't provide, but I was tried to explain that this wasn't about providing the normal things for your child. This is about providing an extraordinary thing for an extraordinary person. So we fundraised for that £2,000, and we actually raised £1,000 in 24 hours from the village the town that I live in. Amazing. And it was amazing. We've had amazing support from the town where we live in, and I'll go on to tell you actually where we've gone from there with Indy, because we were stuck on all these pharmaceuticals, things not working, speaking to the doctors. And our pediatric doctor was amazing. He was a really nice doctor who we spoke openly with about cannabis. and said we were researching cannabis, and we told him when we were going to try it. We told him everything from the start because we wanted to be legal and legitimate, and we wanted other people and other children like Indy to have access to this if it worked. And
I've got several questions. I've got several questions at this point, if I may, Tanine. What first put the idea in your head that you thought cannabis might be a route to follow?
So I had a lot of friends who had said they'd seen other people that had used CBD for seizures. And I to be honest with you, I kind of went, yeah, for like a lot of time and felt uncomfortable about going down the avenue. But I got to a point where Indy was so bad that I would have been not a great parent to not do the research myself after being told it time and time again by people. So just from word of mouth, really, just other people sort of saying and like hearing little stories and seeing things on YouTube. And then I came across a lady from Ireland called Vera, and she did some like YouTube videos, and she was in Holland with her very sick daughter, Ava, who had Dravet syndrome, which is obviously what Indy had. So I like followed her story and see that her daughter was getting a lot better. And I was like, maybe this is a thing. So then I started to try to understand why and how cannabis would work for seizures. What mechanism is it working on in the brain? What is it doing? How does it work? You know, everything about it that I could learn, and then down to what cannabinoids were actually beneficial for seizures. We live in this CBD world, but there are lots of cannabinoids and they all have benefits for different conditions.
Amen.
So I started to look into all of this stuff to build a profile of what potentially Indy might need. And then by this point, Indy was on one pharmaceutical, which she'd been on since she was 6 months old, and it was the sodium valproate.
How old was she now at this moment of
She was
time?
like 3.
So she's 3 at the moment you start speaking to doctors about medicinal cannabis.
Yeah.
And the first time is like, and the first time you brought it up to a doctor didn't bring it up to you.
No, I brought it up to a doctor.
Fine. And you had no resistance, which was good. At least you had a supportive doctor, which is incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible you had a supportive pediatrician.
He was a great doctor, to be fair to him. And so then I started to speak to people more openly and freely about it. And what I wanted to do was try it, and I wanted to help her. So I said to ask the doctor to check if he knew if there was any drug interactions with the medication that she was already taking. I hadn't found any myself, but wanted to double check. And then we actually went to a local company in Suffolk who make cannabis oil, legal cannabis oil. And we went around and looked around the facility to see where it was being made and how it was being made. It was CBD Brothers.
Yeah, they're an awesome company. Company.
And they supported me in Indy, and they still support me in Indy.
Proper grassroots company. They've been around for ages. They've got an incredible ethos around them, and everything they do is so real. I mean, they really are a great company. But sorry, carry on. Yeah, sorry. I just like it's important. It's important the good guys get like a bit of recognition in this world, because there are so many baddies who are in the limelight, and it's really important to know full well that you found your answer. You found an answer with some people. It's important to know who they are. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely right.
They were so welcoming to us, and we went in and we saw where everything was being made, and they gave us samples of different things, and we discussed it properly. And
the blue, the red, and the black, and
they were just really helpful and just made me feel like they were there to help me, whatever it was, even if I needed to cry. They were there for me. So we went away with, I think, a water-soluble purple oil. I think it was a long time ago. And it sat in my cupboard for like 3 weeks.
You didn't use it?
Biggest regret of my life. It sat in my cupboard for 3 weeks, and I watched Indy continue to suffer because I was petrified of giving it to her.
Are you a cannabis user?
Well, that's not a fair question.
I've just had a nice hot chocolate, CBD hot chocolate, which my friend Juliet makes, whole plant products. I only use whole plant products. So
I'm curious as to, like, if you're a user, you're usually more inclined to use a product. If you're not a user and you're fearful, you're less inclined to use it. I was just curious look, I know Tanine now. I don't know Tanine 4 years ago.
I don't know if that's so true, in the sense that I've got this child in front of me where these seizures are life-threatening, and I could give this and it could make her worse. you,
Didn't want to take the
anybody
risk.
could go and maybe smoke cannabis or use cannabis in a vaporizer or use cannabis in another form, we are not going to have seizures from. I'm not making the condition worse, was what I was worried about.
And the thing to remember here is, as a young parent, you look at a child, and you have so much love, and you're desperate to do the right thing. So I totally understand. Although you've self-deprecatingly said the worst decision you made was leaving in the cupboard for 3 weeks. It might have been 3 months with me, because you're thinking, I don't want to do the wrong thing because I will never forgive myself. And Tanine, I'm just going to read a comment from Nathan Wogman, who says, as a father with 2 young children, this is sending a shiver down my spine. You are an inspiring and amazing lady.
And that is why we brought her on the show, everybody.
That's so kind.
Incredible.
Anyway, so, all right. So let's walk you through this. You get to the cupboard, you've opened it up, and you said the time is. Was there a particular moment that said, "Oh, look, we're gonna do this"? Yeah,
I was up with Indy all night having seizures. She was vomiting from having so many seizures, and we were at the point then where, unless she needed medical intervention, there was no point ringing an ambulance, because there was nothing they could do. And what they did do sometimes would make Indy more uncomfortable, not through they're following protocol, and I've got no issues with it. But as parents, there was a point where we were like, right, she's going to have this seizure. She's then going to go to sleep, unless it's abnormal or she's continuing to seize and we can't stop it and she's not having breaks. She needs medical intervention. All that would happen would be she'd be blue lighted to hospital, she'd be pinpricked for sugars and stuff, which we knew weren't an issue, and then she's in a hospital bed, and it's uncomfortable. Yeah, and it's just like this repetitive cycle. So for 3 years I spent Mother's Day in hospital, had Mother's Day breakfast in hospital. And I got to the point where I just thought there has to be a better way, there has to be a better life, because she's not living right now, and I don't want to see her like this, and I don't want her to live like this. So she had this really awful night, and it was early morning, and I just made the decision that I wasn't going to hold back anymore, and I was just going to try. And by this point, I had no dosing advice, like whatsoever. Like, I literally didn't know how much to give her. There was not, there wasn't anywhere you could look to find an amount.
If you go back like 4 or 5 years when you were doing this, so 4 years ago, well, 4.5, 5 years ago when you were doing this?
Yeah, 4 years.
4.5, 5 years ago was basically, it was like the CBD market was a sheet of white paper. So people knew that CBD existed, and they knew that CBD did something. There was a story which came out of America of the farm of Charlotte's Web farm, which was all about CBD. And, they're like they made a documentary in it with Dr. Sanjay Gupta on CNN about how CBD was so beneficial and whatever. But that was 5 years ago. And what happened is there was still so much misinformation, because the stories which were being told were not being affiliated with the Stanley Brothers product. So there was this whole documentary made about this farm in Colorado, and then these other people, other places in America who were using CBD. And it was a little bit like no one really knew what was going on. There was a bit of information about it, but it seemed a little bit like, this seems too good to be true. Do you know what I mean? So I can understand where you're coming from. It was like really new. Over the last 5 years, you've had millions of people basically dropping drops down their throats for hundreds of thousands of different reasons. And now we almost have a Bible on what we know cannabinoids do. But originally, you're not. No, sorry.
Absolutely. So, Tanine, how did you? Because that even occurred to me that the people who have provided.
She's Project
CBD
X. Do you know what I mean? She's Patient X, like Patient Zero. That's why I've got so much respect for her.
No, I get it. So, how did you decide the dosage? Because I wouldn't know where the hell to start. So, how did you do this?
So, there's a company called Realm of Caring in America. So we went to Realm Caring. We had like some conversations with Realm Caring. Obviously, they don't know the Pacific oil profile. So then that becomes, fairly difficult. But you do get a sort of like understanding of what is a sort of ish dose. And that's genuinely how I felt. I'm not going to lie. And because of the legalities around it, the people that provided me with the oil they can't tell me how much to give Indy.
We're
Even
not
if
allowed
they
to make medicinal claims in our industry. So if
we had a industry of Facebook people, YouTube people going on and saying like, buy CBD, it's great for seizures, and we had this sort of thing starting to bubble up, but absolutely no one being able to talk about how much to give anyone. And the reality of that is quite a scary place to be. So we started off at really, really low amounts, and I never use drops. I always use a syringe, because drops I feel can be inconsistent. We can overdrop. You know, it's not ideal. I wanted a record. I wanted to dose properly. So we started off at like, we had a 1 ml syringe and we had like 0.1, like the tiniest bit. So like 2 drops. And, you know, we started like that for a few days, and then we went up and we ended up at about 0.6 of a ml twice a day.
So about 600 milligrams of oil.
Yeah, I think it was the 2%, so it wasn't hugely strong.
So about 12.
This was the point when we really noticed. We were outside in the garden. It was like summer's evening, and Indy came down the steps, and she was normally pretty unstable on the steps and couldn't really do steps. And I'd gone to get her, and I was like, okay. She like came down the steps, and then we sat in the garden for a bit, and she just did this like funny run down the path, and it was like she just ran. Did you see that?
You saw her run?
Yeah.
The first time. How old was she?
Yeah, she was just over 3.
3, and the first time you ever saw your daughter run. So my next question is going to be, how quickly did the effects of the cannabis get noticed? And you're saying like instantaneous.
Literally, like it was like a couple of weeks when we got to that, because we titrated up slowly. So when we got to that dose, we really noticed that there was, which made me think, okay, this is great, but you know, are we at the right dose? Do we go up? Could we see better? Like I didn't know what to do. So I thought, well, this stuff works, and this is helping her. So how do we go about letting people know that this helps? How do we go about being legal? And how do we go about, you know, providing this for Indy? So CBD Brothers were amazing and were providing that for us, and that was hugely helpful. But I wanted Indy to have a prescription. I wanted Indy to have a prescription. So there's a lot more story before the prescription.
Well, you've got 15 minutes, 13 minutes. I would love to know the story of the prescription for our other listeners out there who might be listening thinking, I want to get a prescription for my daughter.
Okay, so
I want to get more than CBD.
This was before there were medical cannabis clinics here in the UK. Now there obviously are medical cannabis clinics here in the UK that people can go and see a doctor and be prescribed particular cannabis which is good for their ailments. So that's really positive. That's something that I think has come out of people talking about it. To get Indy's prescription, we fundraised about £30,000 and got on a plane and moved to Holland.
Wow.
Within 5 days, Indy got really sick. So we're at the point where we're on this oil. We don't know if we can go up. We don't know if we can go down. We don't know what to do. She'd been really, really good. What's going on? She's not having a great patch. We took her off the oil. She's really sick. So the oil was still doing something. So when we took her off it, she wasn't good at all. And we booked her appointment at a hospital in Holland, a world-renowned hospital, and we were seeing a pediatric neurologist. And we rang them and we said, like, she's really sick. We need to come like as soon as possible. So they said, come in 5 days. But we knew when we went there, we couldn't come back because her prescription would become illegal in the UK. So for us to pick up her prescription and actually physically bring it on a plane home to the UK was breaking the law. So we stayed there. We fundraised loads of money. We stayed there. It was like Groundhog Day every day because we had nothing to do. We weren't on a holiday. We were sleeping in Airbnbs and moving about and, you know, just keeping our eye on Indy and talking to the doctors via email.
You were just trying to save your daughter's life. That's all you were doing. You were on a mission to save your daughter's life. Incredible.
We got
incredible.
10 days in, or the first night that she had the medicinal cannabis from the hospital in Holland, she slept the whole night. And I was like, okay,
do you know what
this is great.
Do you know when Holland that first night?
She was on Bedrolite, and I think her first dose was 0.3, which would have been 30 milligrams
0.3.
Yeah, it's like a whole plant
300
extract.
milligrams.
No, it's one mil is 100 milligrams. She
1
was on
mil is
0.
1,000 milligrams. In total, though, 1 mil is 1,000 milligrams.
Of
Yeah.
CBD or full product?
Or full product.
Yeah. But of CBD, of the CBD itself,
it's a 10%. Sorry,
yeah,
that's
so
what I'm asking. Yeah.
Of CBD itself, she was getting about 30 milligrams twice a day of the active ingredient that people were looking at being the ingredient that stops seizures.
Very cool.
And she slept through the night. And then we'd had to leave our son here. So my husband came back to pick up our son, who was very, very young. He was about 8 months old, and came back to Holland. And day 10, Indy ran to her brother and started to try and tickle him and play with him. She literally never looked at him in 8 months. She literally had never looked at him. And it was something I'll never forget. And she was just so happy. It was like I had my child back from this sedated child in a buggy. And that's all I could do with her was put her in a buggy and go for walks and read her books. And there was no interaction by this point. She'd gone from that to laughing and screaming and finding her voice. She wasn't talking words, but she was finding herself and finding that she could have fun in her world. And it was the point where I was like, this needs to be available to people. This is unfair. We've watched her suffer for nearly 4 years now, and she didn't need to suffer. And that was the point where I spoke with the NHS doctor, and I said that would he apply to, they had an expert panel in place at the time. And I asked him if he'd apply to them to sit so that Indy could have a license to use the medicinal cannabis in the UK so that we could return.
Is this the same pediatrician at the beginning, or is this so the whole way along you've had the same pediatrician?
Yeah, up until now. So he did that. That was great. That she was awarded a license to use medicinal cannabis, but there was a clause within the license. The clause within the license was that she would be taken off of that medication as soon as Epidiolex was available. Epidiolex is a completely different compound, as Ollie well knows. It's a CBD isolate. It is not the same as Bedrolite. Bedrolite contains varying cannabinoids that work in synergy that help Indy. And we had tried CBD isolate previously and it hadn't worked.
If you guys remember a few shows back, isolate is the white powder, and Bedrolite is more something like this. It's like a full plant extract. So, I mean, in this, you've got so many other cannabinoids, lipids, fat, flavonoids, terpenoids. You've really got like a soup, whereas an isolate is always just one single compound and very little direction and very little other cannabinoids to create an entourage effect.
I'm just conscious of the time, and I am riveted by this story, and I absolutely have to know the next stage. I've got to know. It's like,
right, I'll rattle it out as quick as I can. So where did we get to? We got to, so we came back to the UK to an email that said she'd been granted this license, because by this point, to be quite frank, I had decided that I wasn't staying in Holland any longer. And that if it meant that I brought back her medication and was pulled aside for that, I was prepared for that, because I didn't believe I was doing anything wrong. I relieved Indy's pain. The medication relieved Indy's seizures, and that is not harmful. So I took a stance and decided that we were going to come home back to the UK. We didn't get stopped at borders, so we came straight through and we had no issues. My husband travelled back to and from for months on end collecting this oil, and was stopped and had the medication seized. And the reason for it being seized was that we had a prescription for it, but the prescription was for last month, or not this month or something, but it was a Dutch prescription anyway. So they wouldn't allow Indy's medication through. So in the end, we did get it by talking to the NHS, and the head of the NHS, Stephen Powers, spoke with people and managed to get us that access back to that medication if we paid for it. So we had to pay an extra on top of it. We're talking about medication that was already costing us £2,000 a month.
oh my gosh.
And we were fundraising for that. So it wasn't money we could afford to waste. So since that point, Indy has now got a UK private prescription Her NHS obviously wanted her to go onto the Epidiolex, which I wasn't going to do when I'd seen such improvement. I wasn't prepared to take her off something that helped her so much.
Of course, why wouldn't you?
She has had 96% attendance at school pre-COVID. She's doing stuff. She's happy. She's enjoying life. She plays outside. She has gone from what I can only explain as just no quality of life to a much better quality of life. And, you know, I'm not going to sit here and say Indy doesn't have seizures. She does still have seizures, but the impact on her seizures is far less. They are shorter. They are less violent. She doesn't have the recovery on CBD is amazing. She'll have 20 minutes nap and she's up and playing. And you just don't see that on pharmaceuticals. And that was the main thing for us, was to give her that better quality of life. And once we saw that, I couldn't, as Ollie knows, I actually don't like talking on shows and stuff. I've been nervous all day. I can talk about it and enjoy it.
You're so good. I mean, literally, you're incredible. I've shut up. I mean, like, literally, you've got me speechless. You know how rare it is to shut me up? I mean, dude, you're
virtually
awesome.
impossible, but I'm going to try now. Tanine, two quick questions. Number one is, how often does Indy have seizures now? And I have to ask, before you had your son, were you concerned that your new baby would also be suffering from seizures?
Yeah, so Indy's gene mutation, I'm just going to explain really quickly, is classed as de novo, which means that there's no prior family history. And I think there's about like 7% chance that somebody would have a child like Indy. It's really rare to have these gene mutations pop up. So yes, I was worried. So what I did was decide that I had the chance to potentially have a well child who could climb trees and do all these fun things that Indy is restricted, or I would have another child like Indy. Well, I loved Indy, and so I was concerned, but I wasn't overly concerned. And I got my son tested for the gene mutation as soon as he was born, despite the doctors not wanting me to. I wanted to know what I was dealing with. If I was going to deal with the same thing, I wanted to be aware of that and
be ready.
Monitor him and be safe. And if I wasn't, then that was a weight off my shoulders. And thankfully, he hasn't got the gene mutation, and I can assure you, is a fiery 3-year-old boy.
I love that.
Now, Indy is, and she speaks and everything like that now?
So her speech has not been regained, which again, with Dravet syndrome, she may talk in the future. She does communicate, so she does know certain things. So she knows certain words, and she will use them words to communicate with us. She loves food, which was another massive issue for Indy. Indy was living off of milk in bottles because she couldn't chew, because we thought the seizures were causing her to have a lot of mouth pain, but actually I think one of the medications, when we looked into it, one of the side effects from it was jaw and mouth pain. So when we took her off that, I remember this monumental moment where she ate an apple. She came and picked an apple off my kitchen. So this was a child that was on pureed, mashed up food, spoon fed.
Yeah.
And she can now use a fork and a spoon. So yeah, just her quality of life is just hugely better. And we're working on her communication with cards and stuff like that. I hope her speech comes back. I would love to hear her talk again, because she used to tell me she loved me. And I would love her to talk again, but I feel like I'm on the right path to enabling that.
Tanine, we have 2 minutes left, and I want to ask you a question. I think this is very important. I know you're going to you're literally going to drop a grenade right here. So I've got 2 questions. I'm going to do one. What would you say to another mother who doesn't want to use cannabis because it's seen as illegal or worse, immoral, because of the whole demonization of cannabis? What would you say to a mother in that situation who has the opportunity to potentially use the cannabis-based product but doesn't want to because of fear?
Well, I'm always available to talk to. So 1, talk to me, and 2, if you're really concerned about what you're giving your child, be as concerned about what you're giving them pharmaceutically. Do your back research on everything. Look into cannabinoids and what they're good for. Look into your pharmaceuticals and what they're doing for your child as well. So look into it and weigh your options up.
And in the last 45 seconds of the show, Tanine, if people want to get hold of you, is there a website, or how do people contact you if they need to?
I've just actually, I literally launched my website today for my own business, because from my situation with Indie, what I've done is basically opened up my own business to try and help people, where we have some CBD oils, CBD balms.
Great. So
it's
because we've got 20 seconds, what's the
Sweet
address?
pimp.
What is the address?
sweetpinkcbd.com. So
Say that again?
www.sweetpinkcbd.com.
Sweet Pink. Okay. I just want to say from my own perspective, it's been absolutely riveting. I wish we could go on. Nathan, we can't because of the schedule of that's how radio stations work. Tanine, thank you so much. Until next week. Bye-bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.
You're incredible, sweetheart.
Thanks so
You're
much.
incredible.